fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Gavin Stone is here all the way from the UK.
Good evening. Is it? No, it's not evening there. It's morning, is it?
It doesn't matter. You're always in the evening, wherever you are.
Yeah, what can I say?
In the shadows.
He's in the dark.
In the dark could be more fitting, I think.
You sound tired. What's going on?
I've got this dreadful flu that's going around. I've been hanging around with the wrong kind of people yet again, I think.
You got to behave yourself. You got to take care of yourself. You're not young anymore.
I know, tell me about it. I'm trying my best to stay that way, but it's not working out too well.
All that night prowling, haven't you? Got to let it go.
Yeah, you gotta start calming down. You gotta start drinking tea and wrapping up in a warm blanket in front of the fireplace. Go to bed early, get some sleep.
As spies do.
Yeah. It's not all cocktails and martinis in the casino, is it?
No, hot chocolate and pajamas sometimes.
Oh boy. I'd like to know really what goes on. And we've got the guy to do it. New book called Think Like a Spy. Master the Art of Influence and Build Life-Changing Alliances. So Julian Fisher is with us, so thank you for joining us today.
Al, it's great to be here. Thanks ever so much for having me on. It's a great privilege, and particularly so to be joining Gavin.
Why did you decide to write a book like this? What was going on behind your mind? Did someone hurt you or something, and then you...
Or did I bump into Gavin on the dark night and think that I had to exercise my demons?
Yeah.
It's a great question, Al. The short answer is that what I want to do, what I'm quite passionate about, is bringing the skill set that spies use to people, to normal people, because it is a powerful skill set, but it's not only available to intelligence officers. It's not only available to a select breed of people. It's a set of skills that anyone can learn, anybody can perfect and practice, and anybody can use to improve their personal and their professional and even their educational lives.
I would imagine it's hard to get out of some of these practices as well. Like if someone is in it for a while and then they leave the service, so to speak, how do you stop doing these things that you learn? I would imagine that's something that doesn't really happen.
Yeah, I think actually if you take the example of route variation, which is a fairly standard risk management technique to make sure you're not being followed home from the office and so on. I think a lot of people, when they come out of the services, find it very difficult to shake off even that very basic bit of tradecraft, and probably beyond that, find themselves bringing some of the techniques that they've used professionally into their personal lives. And there's an important distinction to make between doing that in an ethical way and doing it in a way which is manipulative. You have to be constantly on guard against not slipping into the use of techniques for selfish and maybe unethical ends.
Yeah, it's quite the skill. I know when I met Joe, one of our other co-hosts at in Seattle, we went to the Left Coast crime thing, and it was funny. I'd go to meet him at the bar, and I'd get down to the bar, and he could tell me everything about the bartender, his first wife, how many kids he had, where he came from, where he was born, how he lived, and it was just like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's but I find it very difficult not to end up in quite deep conversations with taxi drivers. I often find out quite a lot about their origin story before a ride is over, and occasionally I've had people turn around to me and say, you spent the entirety of that ride talking to the driver about where they come from. And I'd say, did I? That was unconscious. But, it's important because taxi drivers know a hell of a lot more than we give them credit for, because they get a lot of interesting people in the back of their cars and they hear a lot of conversations. So that's a fairly useful habit that I formed, albeit unconsciously.
Actually, funnily enough, I remember that when I was teaching a dissertation a while ago, that was something that I used as an example, was getting to the back of a taxi and change the conversation, the percentages of the conversation from a 50-50 backward and forward to you giving very little to them giving a lot. There are techniques, elicitation techniques that you can use. And for me, it was really, really simple. I just went in and talked about Uber in comparison to taxi drivers. the black cabs in London. Next thing you know, that was it. He was off on a rant, and I got so much information it was untrue. So I'm sure it's a tactic Julian's very familiar with.
It's a great exercise. One of the truths I learned early on in my career is that people really want to talk about themselves. And we all know that, don't we, really? We all instinctively know that if you're in a conversation, what you're really doing is waiting for the opportunity to chip in your own views or a story about your own day or your own history or whatever it might be. And actually, if you can switch it around so that you become the listener and allow people to be the talkers, you can learn an awful lot just simply by keeping your mouth shut. And one of the wonderful side effects of that is that they tend to think that you're quite interesting because you're interested in them.
Yep.
Curious people are interesting. I wonder why that is. And I would say it's because curious people tend to be interested in the person they're talking to. And if somebody's interested in you, you instinctively think they are interesting in turn. And that's a really powerful, it's quite simple, it's quite straightforward, but it's a very powerful tool used in the right hands and used well.
Yeah, definitely. I love that with, and I've even used it on dates, and I've gone out and had a date, and I've said, at the beginning of the night, use techniques that we know in our tradecraft, Julian, that kind of allows the elicitation to go on throughout the night, and I've hardly said a word, and by the end of the night, they've said, oh, you're so interesting, and you're such a great conversationalist. And I'm kind of smirking, thinking, I actually didn't really say that much, I left it mostly to you.
And then after a few assignations of that nature, you come down with the laggy.
Exactly, yeah. So that'll teach me.
I mean, there's a serious point there that some of these techniques can be used in a very personal setting, including dating. And there are whole industries out there, aren't there, of how to use them for as techniques on the dating scene. I'm not sure I'd want to get into that, but. It is there. To me, that's in the grey area. Not what you were saying about just being a good conversationalist and being interested in the person you're with, Gavin. But I think when you start using some of these techniques with a particular end in mind on the dating scene, then I think you're getting into difficult questions about ethics. Let's put it like that.
Oh, definitely. The main thing is, though, is it just goes to show exactly how dynamic all of the tradecraft is, and the things that we know, how they are applicable to so many areas, not just to the world of spying and intelligence, but I use it in everything I do pretty much. Most interactions and my everyday life generally involves some form of tradecraft, one way or another.
Yeah, and I think probably unconsciously most people do. And coming back to the question now about why I chose to write this book, it was partly because as I reflected on my career, I'm ancient now. I've got to that stage in my life when I can look back and take stock. And one of the things that I realised is that throughout my life, even before having any form of rigorous training or formal training in those techniques, I was using them subconsciously or unconsciously and to very powerful ends. There's an awful lot of skills and capabilities out there that we are using every single day, not just people with a background in professional espionage or spying, whatever you want to call it, but all of us. And if you can build a consciousness of the way in which you're doing that, a self-awareness about the way you're doing that, and use it in use the skills in an intentful and structured manner, I genuinely believe it can be life-altering.
Let's talk about your history and where you come from and how. What in your life have you applied to this book? So
I have quite an unusual story in one sense, but a very ordinary story in another sense. I come from the Midlands, as does Gavin, a place called Birmingham, not Birmingham, Alabama, but Birmingham in Warwickshire, the Midlands in the UK. And when I was being brought out there, it was the poorest, well, it was described as the poorest postcode in the United Kingdom. That's what would be called a zip code in America. So the poorest region of the United Kingdom. I'm not sure what metric they were using to assess that, but let's take that at face value. It was not somewhere where many people were born into a great deal of privilege. But I was privileged in the sense that I had parents who were musical and intellectual, and they persuaded us or supported us to study hard and to debate and to read. So I had in some ways a fabulous upbringing from the point of view of a supportive family, but the money wasn't there. You know, we were not well off in any way, shape or form. And there was very little of what I have already called social capital available. You know, I didn't have parents who could pick up the phone and make something happen to give me the break that I might have needed educationally or professionally. When I was 11, a very tragic event occurred in that my sister took her own life. She was the oldest in the family. At the time she was, I believe she just turned 21. And that obviously had a profound effect on me, which left me reeling and, you know, in a vacuum of absolute grief, the like of which I would not want to inflict on anybody. To the point that a year later, I stepped out intentionally in front of a moving car. Now, I'm not sure at the time that I could honestly say that I was seeking to take my own life, but I was certainly seeking to avoid going to school that day. And it was almost unquestionably a very serious cry for help, and could have been far worse than it was. And I sprung onto the opposite side of the road, and had there been a vehicle coming the other way, then we certainly wouldn't be having this conversation today. Fortunately, there wasn't, and I ended up in hospital for the better part of a year. And actually, that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because while I was there, I met an extraordinary young nurse called Maya, and Maya was a refugee from Iran shortly after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, during which her father had been disappeared as a counter-revolutionary. And Maya had arrived in the UK essentially unable to speak English. She got by, but she certainly wasn't fluent. She wanted to follow in her father's footsteps. Her father had been a medical doctor. She was determined to become a nurse, but was struggling to do so because, of course, she was finding it difficult to pass basic examinations. And she lit upon the idea of asking her teacher to get in contact with students at universities across the country who might be learning Farsi. And they found one who lived around the corner, a young chap called Dan, Israeli Brit. And Dan and Maya would meet every day, and they would have 1 hour speaking in English and 1 hour speaking in Farsi over the course of the summer. And by the end of that summer, Maya was able to speak English. More important than that, Dan's father gave amazing support to her, paying for the time that she spent with his son, so that she was able to support her own mother, who was struggling financially, while studying. And with that support, she managed to pass the exams that she needed to get on to become a student nurse. And she said to me one day, she used to call me Kuchulu, which is Farsi for little one or dear one, I believe. And she said to me one day, Kuchulu, you know, the most important thing in life is allies. Never forget that. And I never have. And actually, that's exactly what this book is about.
You know, how hard do you think it is for an average person to learn these techniques?
Not hard at all, in fact. And I say that because I genuinely believe they are inherent to most of us. And that goes whether you're introvert or extrovert, whether you're shy, whether you're intellectually accomplished or less so, whether you're sporting or not sporting. Because actually, every day we get up, every day we interact with somebody, and this goes back to what Gavin was saying, that we're using these techniques. I'm sure he and I use them perhaps rather more than others, but pretty much everybody uses some form of technique related to influence in their interpersonal relationships, whether that's just getting somebody to bring you a cup of tea in bed or persuading somebody to give you a promotion at work. You are bringing to bear some or all of the techniques that I talk about in the book, and I've covered 9 of them. And so they're inherent. They are something that apply in all interpersonal interactions. Rightly, the way in which those skills are used, the ends to which they're put by intelligence agencies, rightly, those are secret. You know, the precise things that are done with the skill set. But the skill set itself is not a secret, and that's the big secret. It's not a secret. We all have access to it. We all can develop those parts of our personality which play into the ability to build strong and enduring alliances. To do that, one really important thing is you have to get away from the screens and get back into real life and get back into talking to people and engaging with people in real life. And I think that's vitally important, particularly for young people today.
Yeah, I would imagine that changes the whole perspective of someone. Like when you meet a 20-year-old today, the way they communicate is going to be a lot different than people older than that. Do you know what I mean? Like the way a lot of them don't even look at you in the eye.
That's right. They pick up terminology which I think is probably a little alien to us older types. That in itself is not a problem. But I certainly think it is a problem that they feel unable to engage often in a meaningful way. And you're neglecting those interpersonal skills, such as just the ability to listen with intent and to listen actively to what somebody else is telling you, because they are so absorbed in the screens. And I've lost count of times when I've been with people in their 20s and 30s even, where after a while you give up on the idea of having a meaningful conversation with them, because it is all interspersed with them picking up their phone and firing off messages. So I think they've forgotten, or perhaps don't understand in some cases, that communications technology is fantastic, but it's only fantastic because it's communications technology. And technology is between two people, ultimately. And I think there's a tendency on the part of some people to think the end is the communication technology in itself, whereas actually it's just a way of speaking to somebody. And it's no different really from picking up an old landline when we were kids. But it becomes pervasive, and I think that's what I would encourage every younger person to get away from to the extent they can. And I don't blame them, because it's very, very difficult. These things are built to be addictive, and the number of apps and the number of capabilities on that handheld device is just mind-boggling. I mean, I go back and think when I was a kid, there was something called the ZX81, which was a very rudimentary computer, which I lusted after, and you could just about play a very rudimentary game of tennis, with a moving cursor sort of dotting across the screen. So, I think what people have access to today is absolutely phenomenal, and to be applauded in some ways, but to be handled with care, because by spending too much time with our devices, we forget the important thing, and I just keep coming back to the important thing is those interpersonal skills, because in the end, as we learn from the world of spying, it's all about interpersonal relationships.
Can you do these techniques on the internet, like on social media or stuff? Can you still do a lot of this kind of work through a computer screen?
You absolutely can. I mean, let's take one of the skills that I talk about. That happens to be the first one, is targeting. And targeting is simply finding people who are able and willing to support you in whatever goal it is that you're trying to meet. So I talk about setting your objectives, your goals, and then going in search of goals allies. And finding the right goals ally is not about networking. It's not that sort of traditional networking. Funny that we talk about online networking now with the word traditional, or at least I have just done now. It's not that sort of. It's not just about building up a bank of contacts or friends and getting that buzz from the fact that you've got 2,000 friends online or whatever it might be. It's actually targeted, as the word suggests, and within that very wide range of people that you have access to now through these communication means, and that is in itself an amazing thing to be welcomed. You can engage with people in walks of life that I wouldn't have been able to reach as a youngster very much more easily now. But the danger is there's so many that I think it's easy to forget that the important word is targeting. You're trying to find the right person. And the various apps that you use in social media are a great introduction to that, but they have to be used in a specific way. But there's no reason why you shouldn't make that initial contact online. Absolutely no reason at all. All I would say is, as a research tool, as a targeting tool, it's absolutely fantastic for the initial program or the initial part of the project to identify people who might be able to support you in your goals. But I implore people, as soon as you possibly can, get it offline, get it into real life, because what you won't get is those extraordinary moments of human interaction where real proper bonds develop. I don't think you can really do that online. I think you can get some sort of, we've all heard of cases where you get people being manipulated, particularly on dating apps, by imposters or people who are putting up fake profiles and all the rest of it. But that's a very niche thing. I don't think in general that it's possible online to build those deep, meaningful interpersonal connections where somebody is motivated to give you the support to help you meet your goals.
Yeah, because Gavin's been using Grindr for quite a while.
It's not working out so well for me. I mean, you can like what Julian said, that you can get these relationships online that to an extent kind of over time you can build on, but certainly not the same level of rapport that you can build with somebody a lot quicker in person. You know, if you're out having drinks together or whatever the case may be. And I found this with many things in life. You know, if you've got somebody and you can match their body language, you can match their energy. These things just kind of really speed up the process of rapport building, which obviously you can't do online. You can still build a relationship with somebody online, but never to the same levels as you can, and in the same speeds as what you can in person.
No, that's right, Gavin. And I mean, you literally wrote the book on body language, so you know how important that non-verbal communication is, and that what you're not getting in any form of communication which isn't one-to-one, you can't really read body language. So you're missing a huge amount of what that other person is trying to say to you. Early on in my career, while I was still at university, actually, my thoughts were turning to how could I get the best references on my resume? And I happened to be lucky enough to land a research job in our Houses of Parliament. And I was working for a particular MP, and he was fine, and I enjoyed working for him. We got on incredibly well. But I decided one day that I wanted to sit down and think about who would be the most effective name, the most powerful name to have on my resume. So I sat down with a list of MPs in the parliamentary library, and one name immediately jumped out to me, and it was Winston Churchill. And I think most people will recognise that name, Winston Churchill, and they might be thinking, I must have gone mad, because by that point he'd have been long in his grave. Well, the original Winston Churchill was his grandson, also called Winston Churchill, was in the Houses of Parliament as an MP. And I decided that would be a fantastic name to have on my resume. That's a goal's ally and a half. So I set about getting to know him, and this is where you have to be a little bit careful, because I effectively basically stalked him. I worked out where his library was, and I knew where I was hanging around at the right of the times, and there was a thicker tape Reuters machine, so it used to spool out that sort of green and white paper, holes down the side with the headlines of the day, and one of them happened to be outside of his office. And so I would regularly be found scanning the headlines as he came out to look at them, and then I would strike up a conversation about a particularly interesting looking headline. And anything which was coming through, which I knew happened to interest him, because I'd looked at his register of contributions to debate, so I had a fair idea of what his pet subjects were. I would pick up on them, and I would engage him in discussions about them until we got to the point that I felt able to ask him if he was looking for a parliamentary researcher. And he said, well, I'm not, but I'm looking for a speechwriter. So if you think you can turn your hand to writing speeches for me, then I'd be happy to give you a shot. And that's what I went on to do. As a result, I had Winston Churchill as one of my references, and I'm pretty sure that helped to get me my first job out of university. Now, I could have done the same exercise online now, and it would have probably been a lot easier. Back then I had to schlep down to the parliamentary library and pull all the various dusty volumes, Hansard volumes we call them, of debates in the chamber, and flick through and find those debates that he contributed to in order to establish what his set of interests were. All of that could be done so much more quickly now online. And so, I certainly do see online being a very, very powerful part of the targeting tool. But the other bit, my getting into a position where I was able to engage with Winston one-to-one to get him to the point that he took me seriously as this young man, 18 or 19 as I was then, that had to be done in real life. There was just no alternative to that. He wouldn't have taken seriously, if this were happening today, he wouldn't have taken seriously consistent approaches through email or what have you. The important bit, the targeting, could be done online or could be done in a library. The really important bit, the relationship building, has to be done in person.
How long does it take a person to learn these tradecrafts, roughly?
I can't talk about every agency around the world, but broadly speaking, to go through a training scheme at the farm, for instance, the CIA's training facility in Langley, is certainly in the many months, if not the years, as one example, and that's not unusual. But don't forget that they're learning an awful lot of things. It's not just about the interpersonal skills. There are a whole range of other tradecraft skills and so on that need to be learned too. But I think, nonetheless, go through any of those sorts of training schemes, there's going to be a recurrent theme of role-play exercises in which these precise techniques and skills are being exercised and learned. So the learning bit, I think, can be done quite quickly. The ability to use them with fluency and the ability to use them at will and in a structured, intentful and impactful manner, that takes time and that takes practice.
Yeah, that was, I was thinking exactly the same thing as you were talking there, Julian, about the whole kind of intellectually knowing something and the application of it are kind of two different things. You can learn something, but then it's actually going out and applying it in real world scenarios. That's the building up and getting the reps in, as it were. That really strengthens that your ability to utilise these techniques.
I call it building muscle memory, effectively. And if you get it right, it's very powerful. You realise you can use the techniques in the moment. And as I had that experience when I was later on in life, after I'd had a certain amount of time to build up these capabilities, I was trapped in a lift in Zimbabwe with some very hostile characters. And the lift had come to a halt between floors, and then the lights had gone out. And at the time, there was a very serious diplomatic dispute between Britain and Zimbabwe, and we Brits were not particularly welcome there. And I found myself in this lift, and I'm claustrophobic anyway, so that was bad enough for a start. And then the lights went out, and I was hemmed in by a bunch of people who had various weapons, such as pangas, the sort of big curved knives that are often used. They can be used for cutting hedges and could also be used for cutting people's heads off. I'm surrounded by these people. They were probably on their way to cause trouble at some opposition rally or something. And I pulled out my phone and used the torch to throw some light on the situation. Of course, that drew attention to me, and things quite quickly turned fairly ugly. As soon as they realised I was British, and quite difficult to disguise that with my accent, let's be honest. They started to, the murmurs grew, and one or two people started to get a bit jostly, started to push me, and it was a fairly scary situation. But muscle memory kicked in, and there was a guy he was wearing a suit. So the others were sort of dressed in ripped jeans and t-shirts, and there was a guy there wearing a suit. So obviously he was going to be more senior than the others. I just needed to appeal to him somehow, I thought, to get control of the situation. And I noticed he had on his lapel a small enamel badge with the sole word United on, which I took to be, correctly as it turned out, a Manchester United football club, soccer club, lapel badge. And Africans are mad keen on football, I find, on the whole. That sounds like a sweeping generalisation, but I'm prepared to make it, because I don't think I've ever been to a single country in Africa where people aren't absolutely obsessed with football, and actually particularly in many cases obsessed with Manchester United. So I just simply looked over to this guy, caught his eye, and said, "Oh, United, how was the game the other day?" I had no idea whether there'd been a match or not. I'm not really a soccer person, but it was a gambit that was worth a shot, and he sort of looked at me for a while, and I thought he was going to ignore me, and then he said, "Yeah, it was great. Rooney is one of the best players in the world, and he saves that match for us." No, Rooney is not the greatest. It's Ronaldo that's the greatest. And suddenly they were in the middle of this incredibly spirited debate about who was the best player in Manchester United, and they'd forgotten all about their beef with me. And that was an example of targeting in action. Is finding the person, the ally in that precise circumstance, who could help to get me out of the dilemma that I found myself in.
Wow. Why don't you get into politics?
Well, there's lots of reasons why not. Right now, I think I don't think that's a bit of
Doesn't look like a good job opportunity right now.
No, it's very much the case that, particularly in Britain, and I think probably everywhere, politicians are set up to fail. They're set up to be attacked. Our newly elected government, they came in only back in July, and already they are being attacked from all angles for a whole host of things. It's not I think your life would not be your own. So yeah, I applaud people who go into politics if they go in for the right reasons, but it's not for me, I don't think.
Yeah, it's not a winning situation, that's for sure.
No, indeed not.
And I think the only former spy that's done any good as a politician has been our friend Putin. Julian, I know you, because you've got your book, Think Like a Spy, which is I've got my copy here on the desk. It's absolutely brilliant, as I knew it would be. I know you were talking previously as well about a kind of another part to it, which I'm not going to put any spoilers out, because it's not my place to do. But have you ever thought about writing fiction as well? Has that ever crossed your mind?
I have, in actual fact, written 2 novels, one of which got fairly close to being published, but there were some legal problems in the end, which just got in the way and were too much to overcome at the time. So actually, I'm quite glad about that, because as I look back on it as the first attempt at writing a novel, it probably wasn't as good as it could have been. So I had another shot at it. I've written a second novel, which has never seen the light of day. It sits to this day somewhere in the dusty recesses of my laptop. No, it is a good deal better than the first one, but for some reason I can't bring myself to share it with anybody just yet. And I'm not quite sure what's holding me back on that. But one day the answer will present itself. I probably just need to tweak something, and then I'll feel like it's complete and ready to go out into the world. I'd love to. I think there's nothing more thrilling really than writing creatively. And I managed, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a fair amount of creative writing in the book Think Like a Spy. I sought to tell stories in a compelling way. And I would really love to turn that to writing a full novel and having it published. So I really should dust down the one that is sitting there somewhere in one of my long neglected files.
Yeah, it's always good. Just put it out there. Come on.
You're right, Al. I mean, it's I'm my own worst enemy sometimes. I would say to everybody, my advice would be: there's no point in writing and then sitting on it. Just get it out there, show it to somebody. If the answer comes back and it's no good, at least you know. So I know we said right at the outset, didn't we, that knowing something intellectually and acting on it, two very different things. And here I'm falling prey to the temptation not to act by the fact that I know it would be the right thing to do.
Well, there's a book you should read. Think Like a Spy.
Touche, Al.
Well, let's talk about how people find you. Now, are you set up on social media, website, and all that stuff? Where do you like people to go when they want to find out more about you?
I have an author website, which is julesfisher.com. So in my personal life, many people know me as Jules rather than Julian, so I use that for my website, Jules Fisher, JULESFISHER.com. And I also have a Substack, which I started recently, where I explore cases of people in fiction, on the screen, between the pages of a book, the covers of a book, or in real life, where they're using these techniques that I write about. Not in an espionage context, but in a dramatic context. So I've written a piece on Oskar Schindler's recruitment of Amon Gert in the fantastic film Schindler's List, for instance. That's the most recent one. I'm just about to write one on the use of spy techniques by Withnail in the film Withnail and I. So it's a slightly different take on drama and the use of espionage techniques. And those articles can be found at julianfisher.substack.com. The other thing I'd say is that on my author website there's a contact form there, and I encourage readers to get in contact with me. It's not a contact form that goes off into the ether. It arrives in my inbox, and I will respond to everyone who writes to me, so long as it's not just a volley of abuse.
Well, we'll have everything up on our website as well, so people can find it easily. And we appreciate you being here. And, of course, the book, Think Like a Spy. And Julian Fisher, thank you.
Thank you very much, Al. It's been a pleasure. And thanks to you, Gavin.
No problem. Thank you.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.